Story 1. The Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bomb documentaries they had us watch in grade school stuck with me. Story 2. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Particularly the scene where a cute little sentient cartoon shoe is killed on screen by being slowly dunked into a vat of flesh-dissolving chemicals. Story 3. The picture of the firefighter holding the injured child from the Oklahoma City bombing made a strong impression on me. I was in my school library looking at the World Almanac when I saw the picture. It upset me so much that I went to the bathroom and cried. I was about 9 years old, and I still remember how upset it made me feel. Story 4. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The boat scene really unsettled me for a while. The sheer terror the actors experienced was genuine and stayed with me. Story 5. I was a kid before parental guidance for children under 13 was a thing. I saw Poltergeist when I was about 6. We moved to Ohio, and the house we moved into had a tree right outside my window. Guess how scared I was to sleep near that. I also hated spiders from watching Something Wicked This Way Comes. Story 6. The donkey transformation scene in Pinocchio affected me so much that I begged my family not to bring me to Disney whenever we went on vacation. This is why, to this day, I still prefer Universal. Story 7. Seeing September 11th live really affected me. As far as movies go, Jurassic Park. I still hate being outside during thunderstorms. Story 8. When I was about 4 or 5, I snuck downstairs and peeked behind the couch to see the show my mom was watching. She said we kids absolutely could not see it and warned us not to sneak downstairs or we would regret it. It was the IT miniseries. I could not go to the bathroom by myself for weeks. Story 9. There was a religious video we watched in school that showed close-ups of the actor playing Jesus being whipped. I fainted then threw up on my religious education teacher. Story 10. The Original Faces of Death. Granted, I know now that it is all fake, but 12-year-old me in the mid-1990s sure did not know that. Story 11. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. The boat scene. I am 44, and it still lives rent-free in my head. Story 12. September 11th live coverage and the news following that. I was 8 years old, and it made me realize there were real bad people in the world. I had to sleep on my mattress on the floor of my parents' bedroom for months. Story 13. Rotten.com. The internet was very new, and my best friend was very into it and showed me that site. That was around the year 2000, and I still cannot shake some of those images. Also, Terrifier. I hate that movie. Story 14. The scene in Superman 3 when the woman was turned into a robot. I have no idea why it was so horrifying, but I still remember it. Story 15. Chucky. It was on my grandmother's television when I was very young, 3 or 4 years old, and it absolutely scarred me for years afterwards. Story 16. Watching the news as a kid, listening to the killed in action and wounded in action figures from Vietnam. Story 17. When I was 7 years old, my parents took me and my sisters to see The Godfather at the drive-in. I loved horses. Story 18. I have 2 experiences from my childhood and 1 from adulthood. First childhood experience. In an episode of The X-Files that my older brother watched, a woman hides under a bed, and a creature pulls her out and kills her. That scarred me for life. Second childhood experience. I watched a movie as a child where 2 siblings, a boy and a girl, play outside. The brother pushes the girl, she hits her head, and dies. For some reason, the girl's open casket was in the entryway of the house. The brother wakes up in the middle of the night, goes downstairs, and apologizes to the corpse. Then the girl opens her eyes and says, "Boo." The scene then jumps to the brother's adulthood. Adulthood experience. In the movie Death Proof, specifically the scene where the man kills the girl he picked up at the bar. That scene shook me to my core. Story 19. The issue of Fangoria that featured Pet Sematary. Of all the things, it was a behind-the-scenes shot of the actor who played Victor Pacow laughing while getting his head wound makeup touched up that affected me the most. Story 20. The Hobbit cartoon movie, specifically the part where they are in the cave with Smeagol. Everything was just so dark, and the style of the animation was very creepy. I love it now because it is so different, but back then it had me in tears. Story 21. The concept of the weeping angels terrified me as a child. If I noticed a statue, I could not bring myself to blink or look away unless forced. It is a shame they lost their fear factor in later appearances. Story 22. We could see the screen at the drive-in from our yard. A softcore adult movie horrified me, seeing large body parts glistening. Yucky, I thought. I swore I would never see one in real life. I relented later in life, though. Story 23. I was a wild early internet kid, so I had seen cartel executions, BME Pain Olympics, Faces of Death, and all that ogreish stuff. The operation scene from Fire in the Sky really got under my skin. That metal tube in his mouth and the slide of the conduit down his throat. Ugh. Story 24. I was kind of unnerved by the Donkey Kong Country 1 game over screen. I guess I am lucky, since I feel bad for the unfortunate people who accidentally watched Happy Tree Friends. Story 25. The Final Countdown. Not Final Destination. That time storm scene and the time storm again were awesome. I was glad to watch a movie made for adults. Story 26. The Ghost Train song from Hey Arnold. I still think about it sometimes. I am not even sure what it is, but it scared me so much. Story 27. In elementary school, we watched an anti-drug short called The Boy Who Was Swallowed by the Drug Monster. Terrified me for weeks after watching. Even thinking about it scares me. Story 28. The strange thing about the Johnsons is that I couldn't understand how someone could do that to their own father and abuse him so severely that he didn't have the courage to stand up to them. He died before he could escape the abuse. The mother did nothing until it was too late because she was too ashamed to address the problem. She feared it would ruin their perfect suburban family image. It was just horrifying. Story 29. The Count from Sesame Street. Also, the THX introduction with the very loud sound that would play before a movie. I would scream every time it played before the movie. Story 30. The Michael Jackson Thriller video. I watched the first few seconds of the transition. I had a nightmare for a good 2 years. I recently watched the video completely through. It was literally the mildest horror thing there is. Haha. Story 31. Red Asphalt, which we watched in driver's education, made me hate driving for my first few years and made getting in a car accident my biggest fear. I guess that means it did its job. Story 32. Donnie Darko really freaked me out. I watched it way too early, and I thought it was very creepy but sat through it so my older cousin wouldn't think I was a wimp. It was my first existential crisis. I laugh looking back at it now, especially since a good friend of mine from high school has been dating the actor who played Frank for years. Story 33. The Night of the Living Homeless episode of South Park, particularly the scene where a scientist shot himself in the head repeatedly, screaming in agony as his body refused to die. Story 34. A documentary about people whose muscle turns to bone. I should not have been watching it at such a young age, but it is also part of life. Story 35. The part when Dumbo gets drunk. I absolutely hated that. All the horrible elephants and flashing images. As an adult, I now know he has vertigo. Story 36. Stephen King's Cat's Eye. I slept with a book under my pillow so I could kill the troll when it came to suck my breath. Story 37. Hatchet. When the child swims into the downed airplane and the pilot is just floating with his eyeballs coming out of their sockets. This is probably why I get a sick feeling when I go underwater. Story 38. I honestly cannot remember the name of it, but back in the early 1980s, I saw a short film with a sentient roll of film strip that literally wrapped up a grown man and ate him. Then it typed out a job offer letter and mailed it to its next victim to come to the office where it was located. I am 50 years old, and it still sticks with me. I tried really hard in high school to never handle the stuff. Story 39. Death on the Highway. They showed this in the 1970s in driver's education. There were burned bodies, decapitated bodies, and in the one that stayed with me, they were dragging a burned body up from a gully. They were trying to put the body in a body bag when the arm snapped off. A girl passed out in class. Things were truly different back in the day. Story 40. Pastor's kid here. I grew up in a Pentecostal church, and the best way to scare a Pentecostal teen or kid straight was with messed up Christian horror movies. Thief in the Night terrified me as a small kid. I would have random panic attacks about being left behind during the rapture and being killed by a guillotine. Honorable mentions: Run Baby Run and Prodigal Planet. Story 41. Indiana Jones Temple of Doom heart scene. That and the bits and pieces I remember from Jeepers Creepers. The end scenes where the girl is begging to be taken instead, but the monster chooses the boy, followed by the audience seeing his body with his eyes missing and the monster popping up behind him with his new eyes. Story 42. Murder magazine my older brother had. It had murder for hire ads in the back. I didn't sleep for days. Story 43. Canadian children will know what I am talking about. Any scene with the owl on Mr. Dressup. That thing creeped me out. Story 44. I saw a lot of disturbing content when I was a kid thanks to the internet. Websites like Rotten.com and videos such as 3 Guys 1 Hammer were examples. That would probably be it. Story 45. The 1990s version of the movie IT with Tim Curry. I watched it when I was 10 or 11. It absolutely traumatized me. Story 46. Funnily enough, Zombieland. I was 8 or 9 when my dad rented it from Redbox. Kid me was like, I can handle this. I'm in the 4th grade or whatever. You can't tell me nothing. Up until about 2 minutes in, when Jesse Eisenberg was explaining the rules and got to Rule 4, the one about buckling your seatbelt. It showed a mom getting away from a bunch of zombie little girls at a birthday party who were hitting her car windows as she was trying to escape. I guess Kid Me realized his own mortality like, oh my god, if there was a zombie apocalypse, I'd straight up die, dude. I went upstairs trying not to sound scared, saying, man, this movie is stupid. This is so lame. While my dad was trying not to laugh. Story 47. 2 things have left me permanently scarred after more than 40 years. The B-movie Piranha, where the kids are all skinny dipping in the swimming pool at midnight and get torn to shreds by rabid fish. To this day, I still have a hard time being alone in a pool in broad daylight. Second, the eel-like creatures that Khan put in Chekhov's ears in Star Trek. To this day, if I feel anything like something touching or crawling near my ears, I completely freak out. It is hilarious to watch, as many people have told me. Story 48. Seeing the R. Buddy Dwyer newscast. Walter Cronkite narrating the fall of Saigon. Seeing the Challenger explode. Story 49. The original George Romero Night of the Living Dead. I was 8 when I saw it, slept with my lights on for weeks, and am now addicted to horror films, especially zombie films. Story 50. There was a news story about teenage vampires eating their parents. I was about 8 years old and horrified that humans could be so cruel. Story 51. Killer bees. As a child in the 1990s, I was terrified of going outside every time the news reported more killer bees. Story 52. British kid of the 1980s, so nosy bonk. I cannot believe anyone looked at that mask and thought it would not scare small children. Story 53. A friend showed me information technology when I was about 6 years old. I had never seen a horror movie before. I remember the scene where he comes out of the shower drain and feeling so bad for the kid, the scene where he is standing across the pond or quarry with balloons, and the one that scared me the most was the blood bubble coming out of the sink and exploding. I stared at my sink every time after that, expecting to see it myself. I remember coming home feeling very downtrodden. I cannot quite pin it down to one emotion, but it was fear, pity, and despair that all hit me like a train. I barely touched my macaroni that night, and my mom wondered what was wrong. My parents did not know I had watched it. In the next few years, they rented me the Chucky movies that I hated. The first movie I saw in theaters was Lake Placid because I liked dinosaurs so much. They figured a giant crocodile was like a dinosaur. Someone gets ripped in half in the first couple of minutes. I did love it. Story 54. My parents let me watch James Bond when I was 4. I once walked in on my aunt and uncle watching the Blue Lagoon just as the crab climbed out of the dead man's mouth. Story 55. A 2000 AD comic at my local shop showed a guy still trying to talk while being slowly digested in something's stomach. This upset me as a child for a long time. I still remember it now at over 40 years old. Story 56. When the Skeksis Emperor died and his body disintegrated, or when one of the adorable gelflings had their life force sucked out, or when the Landstrider was attacked by the Garthim and fell over the cliff shrieking. Everything about the Dark Crystal horrified me. It was a good thing I watched it over and over. Story 57. I was a preteen when I randomly tried to watch Pet Sematary alone. The first part, when the cat came back, horrified and traumatized me so much that just the thought of ever going back still causes a physical reaction. I got to the part where the kid died but no further. My dad walked in just as I freaked out and lost my mind. He still teases me about it. Story 58. My mother insisted on watching the 4 p.m. movie every day, and one day it was Lifeboat by Alfred Hitchcock. The part where the parents sacrifice themselves by going overboard to die and waving goodbye to their child as they float off stuck with me, and I am 59 years old now. Thanks, Mom. There was another movie with small orphan children reenacting the World War II bombing of their village by spearing cockroaches with pencils in a barn. It was especially striking since their parents were killed by bombs. To this day, I wonder if anyone else has seen this movie. Absolute nightmare fuel. Story 59. The child trapped in the well in the 1980s. Then, the Iraq War because it received extensive coverage of bombs and destruction. I had never seen real war footage until that time. Story 60. I got out of bed after bedtime, and my parents were watching a mobster show or movie. They trapped a man in a large safe filled with unset concrete and then pushed it into the water. I do not know the name of the show, but I felt very upset. I do not think I told anyone because I was supposed to be in bed. Story 61. When Webster's apartment caught on fire, I really thought he and Mr. Papadopoulos were going to die. Story 62. Chucky from Child's Play. Children. Seeing postcards of lynch mobs, 100 strong, in 1950s southern United States burning the hanged bodies of dead black children. Guess which affected me the most? Story 63. Red Asphalt, I believe was the name. It did not horrify me but was a bit excessive for a driver training video. Story 64. As an older millennial, I remember many significant events. The fall of the Berlin Wall was frightening to watch, not knowing what was happening. When federal agents drove a tank through the house in Waco, the Oklahoma City bombing, the Columbine school shooting, watching the September 11th attacks live in class. Story 65. The World at War was a documentary shown on television. It was narrated by Richard Burton, if I recall correctly. The film of the naked corpses from the concentration camp being bulldozed into trenches frightened 10-year-old me. Story 66. Did anyone else see The Brothers Grimm with Matthew Damon and Heath Ledger? It took me years to get over the horse swallowing the child in that film and the mud gingerbread man scene. Story 67. 13 Ghosts. I saw that way too young. It was my first exposure to gore. I was about 6 years old. It traumatized me so much that I felt anxiety whenever I saw the movie listed on the TV guide until I was around 18 and finally decided to watch it again to see if it lived up to my memories. I love that movie now. It is so much goofy fun, and Matthew Lillard is in it, which is always a plus. It is on my Halloween movie rotation now. Story 68. Invaders from Mars 1953. Story 69. Stuff about Bigfoot on television made me scared to go outside after dark, because our house was on the edge of a wooded area. Story 70. E.T. The Extraterrestrial. The 20th anniversary was one of the scariest moments of my childhood. Nothing could make me see that little naked uncanny old man, who sounded like he ate cigarettes at birth, as cute or nice. Story 71. When I was 5, I came back downstairs after being sent to bed, and stumbled across my mother watching Celebrity Deathmatch. That made me very uncomfortable and scared. I loved it as a teenager, though. Story 72. The episode of Punky Brewster where they get lost in a cave. I am 42 now and will never watch that again. Story 73. That one movie with the giant bugs had a giant fleshy-looking creature that stabbed people in the head and sucked their brains out. I definitely had nightmares about that for a while. Also, anything with zombies. Story 74. Darkness Falls because I had to walk home afterward. Nightmare on Elm Street made me too scared to sleep. Original Pet Sematary made me think that a toddler was going to come out of my closet at night. Story 75. Not me, but my brother walked in on someone, either my parents or me, watching the first Chucky movie. He was 4 or 5 years old. It left him absolutely terrified. I believe this was the same year that he watched Fox and the Hound and was absolutely crushed by the ending. Why can't they be friends? Story 76. That scene in Ratatouille where the red-headed man is dreaming about the food critic coming to the restaurant and asking for his beating heart on a stick. I couldn't sleep without my hands under my pillow for years afterward because I was afraid that I would tear out my own heart in my sleep. Story 77. The episode of Sooty and Sweep where a ventriloquist and his puppet stay at the hotel. That frightened me so much I missed a lot of school, had night terrors, wet the bed, and was distressed for weeks with my mother consulting child therapists. Several years later, my brother and I were watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and in the first season there is a ventriloquist dummy as a villain. I became hysterical, and my mother immediately grounded my brother for letting me watch it. To this day, I still skip that Buffy episode when I rewatch the series, and I am 34 now. Story 78. Season 5, Episode 9, Creep Course, Tales from the Crypt. To this day, at almost 50 years old, it is still the reason I will not let anyone go near my nose after watching a man paralyze people and then remove their brains, like the Egyptians did with a tool through their nose. Story 79. I was around 10 years old. I read a newspaper article about a drive-by shooting that killed a child playing on the front porch of a house that was shot at. I remember being completely shocked and dismayed at how unfair it was. I thought that the child was just playing and did not deserve to be killed for no reason. It affected me deeply. Story 80. A few scenes from Raiders of the Lost Ark. At the start, when the man takes the idol from Indiana Jones only to get impaled by the spike trap. His eyes bulging out of their sockets and his jaw stuck open frightened me. Then, at the end, when the Nazis open the Ark. Story 81. The first time I saw the Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination, I was in school in the Dallas area. It was shown in world history, American history, state history, local history, and social studies classes. There was an excuse to watch it every year for 12 years. I quickly became desensitized to it, but I was not prepared to watch it the first time at 6 or 7 years old. Story 82. The episode Under the Bed of the show The Outer Limits, 1997, features the boogeyman masquerading as a teddy bear stuck under a kid's bed. He kidnaps the child and holds him hostage in a cave. Story 83. Some video on Japanese science experiments. Saw the hand get unsleeved. I knew it was fake already, but it's like your brain says, yeah, I know we didn't see it in real life, but 100% that's how it looks. Just the casual skin flying off and bones showing. So yeah, that was when I realized people just do things to other people. Why? Oh man, the big question started there. Why? Story 84. I watched the movie with my dad when I was about 6 or 7 years old and threw up on him afterward because I was so terrified. 30 years later, I am still absolutely terrified of clowns to this day. Story 85. The Falklands War News report came on my bedroom radio in the early hours of the morning. I was a kid and thought the Hebrides had been invaded. Story 86. The Wizard of Oz. My mom told me something good was coming on television and I should watch it. She said Michael Jackson was in it, and that was all I needed to hear. I had no idea what I was getting into. I cried twice while watching, but ironically, it is still one of my favorite movies. The first scene that terrified me was when the Munchkins jump out of the walls when Dorothy lands in Oz. The second scene is when they are in the subway and everything starts coming to life and attacking them. Story 87. I know someone has already said Thriller, but I will go with what I have always thought was Michael Jackson's most horrifying music video, Ghosts. When he brings his mouth down to the floor with his hands, when he turns to pieces on the floor, when he takes his face off to reveal a skeleton. It might be corny, but that, combined with the urban legend at the time saying he was still alive, was more than enough to make the concept of a ghostly Jackson extra scary. Story 88. I saw Child's Play 2 at a friend's house. I wasn't allowed to watch movies like that, and I didn't want to. I didn't feel the slightest bit interested. I started crying, and she and her dad made fun of me. I didn't even have a chance to be scared. I was horrified because Chucky was so mean, He was so cruel to that kid, and I just sobbed. Story 89. I remember hearing about a case of an elderly woman who was killed by a wannabe vampire. He cut out her heart and fried it. I think it was in the United Kingdom or Wales. It stuck with me for quite some time. Story 90. That terrifying clown in Poltergeist. The whole movie I was fine until that clown came to life. My mom thought it would be a good first scary movie, but 6-year-old me wasn't ready. Story 91. This sounds very boring, but it is also very true. I was gullible as a child, so basically, anything my parents told me, do not watch this, you will get nightmares, I did not watch. But one thing they did not tell me about was the Ark scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark. The problem with me is that if someone tells me about something I should not know, or in this case watch, I need to know more simply out of curiosity. Story 92, Alien. Also, as much as I loved dinosaurs as a kid, the scene in Jurassic Park where the children have to escape the raptors in the kitchen always scared me. Story 93. Commercials for the movie 2012 claimed the world was truly going to end, and they were selling slots to stay in bunkers. I remember sobbing so hard I vomited on the floor because my parents refused to buy us a place in the bunker. I developed a fear of death the first day I saw those on television. Story 94. I have a few. The scene in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade when the man drinks from the wrong cup and rapidly ages and dies in 30 seconds. The Wizard of Oz, because I was told you could see one of the Munchkin extras hang himself. The part in Roger Rabbit when Christopher Lloyd's cartoon character appears. Anything found on Rotten.com. Edit because I just remembered. The theme music to Unsolved Mysteries and Rescue 9/11. Story 95. I completely believed the website for the Blair Witch Project and was convinced it was true found footage for about a week. Story 96. When I was really little, I watched Lilo and Stitch. The teeth looked horrible. In grade school, our English teachers seemed to forget that non-dystopian literature exists, so we had non-stop readings of The Lottery, The Most Dangerous Game, The Giver, Animal Farm, and others. Honorable mention to The Giving Tree. I do not know what it was, but that story really affected me. Story 97. Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Large March. It looked like this. Tim Burton's first success, and it was amazing. Story 98. The Exorcist. I think I was in maybe 3rd grade or so when I watched it with my dad. Images from that movie have haunted me for my entire life. I am 54 now and I still see some of those scenes in my mind and have to either turn the light on or find a way to deliberately close a mental door on them. I have tried a couple of times as an adult to watch it again, thinking that maybe as an adult it would be less scary or something, but it always makes me feel like a scared kid again. I still have nightmares about it a couple of times a month too. It is difficult. There is not much I would change in my life, but if I could somehow unsee that movie, I definitely would. Story 99. The rock opera Tommy, which I saw on television in elementary school, gave me nightmares for a good 15 years. Story 100. The X-Files episode, The Worm Man. I was in kindergarten and was absolutely terrified of going to the bathroom after that. Story 101. This old poster my dad had is a large image of Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin in greenish blue light. Something always looked unnatural about it. It was an uncanny valley effect, I think. I don't actually know what ever happened to it. Story 102. The German shepherds were used to attack black people in the South just for protesting, along with the beatings. As a white child in the 1960s, I was terrified of what I thought was rightful retribution coming for me. I could not believe people could be treated like that. Story 103. As a young child, Sleeping Beauty. Maleficent's eyes in the fireplace were terrifying. As a 15-year-old, Human Centipede. Forever seared into my brain. Haunts me to this day. Story 104. The VHS cover of Evil Dead 2. In the video store I went to as a child, I had to go through the horror section to reach the kids section. That one video cassette always scared me. Ironically, not only do I love horror as an adult, Evil Dead is one of my favorite franchises. Story 105. The video with the children singing marijuana, marijuana, lysergic acid diethylamide, lysergic acid diethylamide. Many people make it. Many people take it. But not me, but not me. to the tune of Frère Jacques. The 1980s were unusual. Story 106. The X-Files. Season 2. Episode 23. Soft Light. Tony Shalhoub played a scientist whose shadow killed people. This episode terrified me. Story 107. Went with the family in our station wagon to see Willard at the drive-in. That was okay. The double feature was Night of the Living Dead. We were petrified. Story 108. A video on Reddit showed a man hitting a living rabbit on the head with a hammer. The poor animal started seizing, and I stopped the video immediately. I will never forget that rabbit. Story 109. I saw the end of Fargo when I was a child. At least my parents tried to warn me by saying, "Don't look at the screen." But of course, I just had to. As a result, I wrote many stories about people getting shot and put into wood chippers. My parents probably should have gotten me therapy. Story 110. When Hurricane Katrina hit, I was 11 years old. I remember watching the news, and a news broadcaster was in New Orleans. There was a dead body behind him. Story 111. The pool drain episode of Rescue 911. Watching September 11th happen in real time after the school news show. Story 112. When I was about 6 years old, I saw The Wiz for the first time. Then the subway scene really affected me. Story 113. I saw something when I was about 10 years old about spontaneous human combustion and was so afraid I had trouble sleeping for months. I was afraid I would go to sleep and randomly catch on fire. Story 114. Red Asphalt was a film about real-life gruesome car accident victims. It was part of our driver's education class. Story 115. The Sandman animated short from 1992. I remember watching it on MTV's Cartoon Sushi on Halloween night, and it frightened me. I had trouble sleeping that night. Story 116. The X-Files episode where either Fox Mulder or Dana Scully gets cut on a branch in a graveyard, and another hand starts to grow out of their hand. I was about 7 years old when my grandmother had it on the television in the background at her house. Story 117. My art and music teacher brought in a television over 2 days for us to watch a puppet show. It was about a little boy and his sick mother, and he had to go on an adventure to find medicine for her. There was a witch who could shapeshift, and every time she revealed herself, the marionette would pull upwards as the puppeteer grabbed a second set of strings, with the witch hidden beneath the other puppet. This terrified me. I had nightmares for weeks about my friends and family shifting in the same nightmarish way. Due to my very active imagination, it was grotesque when imagining real humans. This piece of media haunted my thoughts for years because I couldn't remember the name. Turns out it is Jim Gamble's adaptation of The Adventures of Peer Gynt, fully available on YouTube. I am also obsessed with puppetry partly because of that show. There is a theory I heard a while ago that I fully believe. Our childhood fears shape our eventual interests as adults. I was an anxious and scared child, but now horror is my favorite genre. Story 118. Jim Jones and the deceased followers were on the news. Seeing that absolutely horrified me. I was 10 years old. Story 119. When I was a kid, they didn't really filter movies on television as well as they do now. Some movies, like horror or dark ones, could be on in the afternoon, especially on weekends. One of them I saw was The Legacy, which was about a rich man who had powers from the devil and was choosing who to give his powers to when he died. Another movie was Devil Dog, about a dog with powers due to devil worshippers. The whole devil worshipper theme was big in the late 1970s and early 1980s, but to a small kid it was traumatic. I also remember seeing a scene in The Clairvoyant where a woman gets handcuffed to the bottom of a pool. I never forgot that. This was also before PG-13 ratings in the United States, so maybe that was a factor too. Story 120. The Goosebumps episode where the girl got stuck with a monster mask on stayed with me for years. After that, I couldn't bring myself to even try one on during Halloween. Story 121. The Witches by Roald Dahl. Read the book, got scared, and then found out there was a film. I swear 6-year-old me could have had a heart attack right then and there. Story 122. I have watched horror movies since I was 5 years old. This made it easy for me to distinguish real life from movies as a child. Then I watched the fourth kind, and it broke me. Why do they have to interlace fake found footage next to actor renditions? To this day, I am still irrationally scared of owls. Story 123. I was taken to see E.T. when I was about 5 years old, and it scared me a lot. I felt relieved when the misunderstood little alien was dying. Story 124. The movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore. Was it supposed to be a scary movie? No, so why did little demons come out of the ground to drag the bad guys' souls into hell when they died? Story 125. I do not know which magazine it was, but one of their cover photos showed a little girl screaming and running naked after her village had been napalmed. Another photo was of a traitor being shot in the head at close range. It showed the faces of both men. I cannot remember if it showed the bullet exiting or if that had been altered. I have seen it so much that I am not sure. Both photos are burned into my memory. I was about 11 years old. Story 126. Seeing hostages in blindfolds being held by terrorists in black masks. I was 9 years old in 1980, and it was on the evening news. American hostages were being held in Iran. I remember one guy in particular, a thin-haired man with a short beard and mustache, wearing a huge, thick bedsheet-like blindfold over his eyes. Even though his eyes were covered, you could still see. He was very stressed. The men holding them were not playing around. My grandfather was upset because he said Jimmy Carter did the diplomatic hard work to get the hostages home, but Ronald Reagan got all the credit since the hostages were not technically released until Reagan took office. Jaws destroyed my childhood at the theater. Iranians holding hostages got me watching network news. Story 127. The werewolf in the third Harry Potter movie really frightened me as a child. It gave me nightmares for a while. There was something about the strange form they chose, which was neither truly human nor wolf-like. I loved the series before J.K. Rowling's controversial views emerged, but I never rewatched Prisoner of Azkaban after the first time in the theater. Story 128. I used to have this Goosebumps book that gave me nightmares as well as Jumanji. I almost scared myself at the idea of a board game being real. Story 129. I watched Twilight Zone many years ago, and it still freaks me out because I remember some of the very creepy episodes. Story 130. 9/11 jumpers on live television as a 9-year-old. Watching Saw 2 in the middle of the night by myself and seeing that man get burned alive inside the oven. Story 131. Railway Safety Week, 2008 public service announcement. That was horrifying. Story 132. The Wizard of Oz. I used to be terrified of the Wicked Witch of the West, and only because of her, I hated the movie. I disliked anything related to the Wizard of Oz. I still have a memory of hiding behind the couch. Looking back now, I guess it was not so bad. Story 133. When I was under 10, I remember whenever Gremlins played on TV, I would start screaming and crying because I was so scared of it. It's funny because now I'm a huge horror fan, but back then, I was scared of my own shadow. Also, another memory is my mom showing me a jump scare video with a car driving up the road. I don't know why she did that. I think I was around 6 years old. Story 134. An episode of Cowboy Bebop that featured a refrigerator monster terrified me as a kid. I think I was half asleep watching bits and pieces of it, and for some reason it gave me nightmares for a couple of weeks. Story 135. Abe's Exodus. The first area contained the Fleeches, which would use their grappling tongues. They would latch onto him, and Abe would scream in pain several times before being eaten whole. I never got past that part until I became an adult. Story 136. I only vaguely remember the details, but I think it was something that aired on a public broadcasting service station. As best I remember, it featured a woman cleaning a bedroom. It was animated, and the jump cut, sped-up animation, and eerie sound effects created a disturbing effect on my mind that sent me into sobbing terror. Story 137. Well, I had this friend who was a bit older than me, and do you remember the Terminator when he took out his eye? I was about 8 years old. It really scared me. Story 138. When I was 9, I saw a distant shot of Chinese executions. It was horrifying. The image was not very detailed, but I could tell the heads were not attached to the bodies. Story 139. Baby Einstein's Neighborhood Animals. I found the dog puppet creepy. It gave me nightmares until I was 10 and still startles me as an adult, though nowadays I think it's funny. Story 140. Hands down, Passion of the Christ was watched when I was 12 years old, after being taken to the movies by my religion teacher. Story 141. Superman 3, 1983. When Vera Webster is pulled into the supercomputer and forcibly transformed into a cyborg zombie. Story 142. The girl's story about her deceased father dressed as Santa in Gremlins did not need to be included. The movie remains unchanged if it is left out, but I was personally affected because it was included. Story 143. The Bandidos murders just outside of London, Ontario. I was young when that happened, and I remember not being able to comprehend that level of evil. Story 144. That Moomin episode where there is a magical hat that changes the child's appearance and no one recognizes him. I used to love the Moomin series. I even went to the Moomin theme park in Finland. However, after seeing that episode, I had nightmares for years. Story 145. A bit tame and I can't remember how old I was. But Scooby-Doo. Zombie Island was absolutely terrifying when I first watched it. Story 146. This I just found again. I thought it was an awful dream since no one else knew what I was talking about. I thought it was Disney, but it was Nickelodeon. Creepy vulture creature chasing kids through the city and park. Sincerely the worst thing for my little brain. Story 147. Dot and the kangaroo was basically normal until the bunyip sequence. What was wrong with the animators? Story 148. There was a picture on our kitchen wall of a child crying with a plate of spaghetti on his head. It upset me terribly. There was nothing cute about it. The child looked very upset. Story 149. Any movie with a projectile vomiting scene like Problem Child 2, Witches of Eastwick, Stand By Me, Monty Python's Meaning of Life, or even the scene in Home Alone where the brother is gagging on the pizza. I was a very emetophobic kid, and every early 90s movie seemed to have a gross-out scene. This is probably one reason I never got into watching movies. Story 150. Tales from the Crypt, specifically the skeleton from it. I never understood why my parents would allow a 6-year-old to stay up and watch it. Story 151. The 2004 re-release of Garbage Pail Kids. I have since become neutral to the era when they looked like Cabbage Patch Kids again and the original era where they did. However, the era when they changed them entirely to make them grosser and bloodier than the originals ever dreamed of being really scared me, especially since I was introduced to them through a near jump scare in a Nickelodeon magazine ad. Story 152. Watching how cows are treated on the Oprah Winfrey Show. My brain could not understand how anyone in power allowed this. Story 153. The episode of Little House on the Prairie titled Sylvia, where a man in a clown mask assaults a young girl. Story 154. My brother was watching Faces of Death, and I walked in and watched 60 seconds of it before leaving in horror. I am pretty sure it made me neurotic. Scenes include people at a family picnic, people in airplane seats crashing down around them, and a bunny scene. Story 155. In my driver's education course, we were shown a video of a woman getting hit by a train. It was supposed to scare us into never stopping on the tracks, but all I remember is the horror of seeing a pedestrian being killed. Additionally, the instructors brought in that day were very casual about it, saying, "Metra, the way to really fly." Story 156. The book Unwind. That scene at the end, from the perspective of a teenager who is kept conscious while his entire body is harvested for organs by the state, is heavy. Story 157. I did not want a giant snatching me from my bedroom at night. No, thank you. Story 158. 1954. General Electric Theater. This man always repeats, "Progress is our most important product," and performs tap dances. Ronald Reagan. Story 159. I remember vividly seeing a video on Facebook of a woman beating a baby, and it was crying. I have never felt so horrified. It was the worst feeling. I cried so much. My mother had to console me. Story 160. The Brothers Grimm movie, especially the muddy gingerbread kid scene. I even tried rewatching it as an adult to see if I was still scared, and unsurprisingly, It set me on edge for the rest of the day. Story 161. The secret of the National Institute of Mental Health gave me nightmares. Then the night I discovered that the National Institute of Mental Health is a real place. Story 162. 1. Kolchak. The Night Stalker episode with a voodoo person who puts a spell on someone who gets scalded to death in her shower freaked me out. 2. The trailer for the original Suspiria terrified me. It is available online. Story 163. Night and Fog, a 1956 French film about the Holocaust, was shown to my class when I was around 15 years old. I remember leaving the classroom with a profound sense of despair, having seen humanity at its worst. Also, Scary Movie 3 because I watched it when I was 8 years old. The Rings parody disturbed me greatly. Story 164. Nazis using bulldozers to push bodies into a pit. I saw it in high school. Then years later, I saw the same footage at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Story 165. That one Adventure Time with the Ghost Fly. While it was playing, I was told that my grandfather fell on his nose and is at the hospital. For someone who had never lost anyone close so far and being so young back then, I just saw that dumb pattern that shouldn't be there. Story 166. Late Generation Z here. Earlier generations probably did not experience this. At some point in grade school, I remember being in the computer lab and playing a math game called Prodigy, where you have to answer math questions in order to fight monsters. I was good at the math part, but the monsters scared me a lot. Story 167. 911. I was in 7th grade, not old enough to fully comprehend what happened, but old enough to know that the world was going to change. Story 168. I was often allowed to watch everything too young, so Hellraisers, Chucky's, The Leprechauns, Freddy, Michael Myers, and others all did a pretty good number on my sleep schedule. Story 169. Resident Evil 3 on the PlayStation. I was already very afraid of zombies. My older brother sat me down when he got to the shop scene. When the zombies broke in, he tossed the controller into my hand and ran away. My character was eaten, and I was in tears. Story 170. Watership Down. Not for children. I am not sure why we owned it and watched it repeatedly despite being absolutely horrified. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.